Hi, welcome back to Future Path. And once again, we have Giri Balasubramaniam with us. And for those of you who are here for the first time or if you have not been part of earlier conversations, I really urge you to go back and listen to the first part with him where he talks about his journey, and then the second part about the Just Business episode of Future Path with Giri, where he talks about business. And also, particularly if you're into education, you should not be missing it at all. But even otherwise, you should listen to it. So just go back, listen to it, and then come here. And for the rest of you, we'll just dive in. You already had a perspective of how Giri thinks, and it's a rare mix of Gandhian thinking, looking ahead. So, Giri, welcome back to Future Path, and
Pleasure.
thanks for making time. And when I just introduced you as Gandhian thinking and looking ahead, I just remembered you had also mentioned HN, uh, uh, H. Narasimha as one of the people who have influenced you, and I have a great admiration for him. So I somehow missed out on commenting on that part, and also uh, uh, in fact, like you said that about him during college, I didn't connect with him as much as I did connect with the way he thinks later on in life. So coming to Future Past and particularly this episode of Future Friday, what does future generally, when you refer to future, you did make this comment in a previous podcast, but generally people refer to future in the context of technology. So what is the context that comes to your mind when we say future?
So, to me, when we look at it from a company perspective and we kind of cast that onto the way the world is changing and the world is moving, we see greater automation, uh, lesser requirement to travel even to work, which was a fundamental requirement pre COVID. People realizing that their time is very valuable and they need to do what is valuable to them in that time frame, which means engagements with pursuits like knowledge, enriching yourself, becoming a better person just for your own happiness and feel good factor is going to be big currency in the future, because people will find ways and means to not waste their time doing things that are not making them a better person or giving them a better experience. Which means companies that are going to enable those experiences that people want to do in otherwise time that was spent probably traveling, going out and sitting and eating, going out and watching movies. Today, home theater is home theater, home food is home food, work is home work. Everything is home, and people want to use the otherwise wasted time, if I may call it that, on personal enriching pursuits. And companies which are going to be providers of those personal enriching pursuits are going to do well in the future. So that's my first view of the future.
Well, technically, that's what books or music or every other content that can be consumed over phone or audio, video, whichever way, right?
Yeah.
So how different do you see that? Because there are uh, so one aspect of content consumption will always be there. Forms are changing, right? Uh, I think when we were growing up, TV was looked at more as an evil. even refer to idiot box. A lot of today's generation won't even associate idiot box to a TV.
Yeah.
So, these perceptions keep changing. Uh, so, if you cut that out, what would the future be?
Yeah. So if you zoom into that, there are two broad buckets that you will find.
Hmm.
The successful people who will look for more entertainment, and the aspiring people who would look to be greater achievers.
Okay.
We fall partly in the Venn diagrams of both, more perhaps on the aspirational side, because people want to be remembered after they are gone. That's today's youngsters. They're not people who think like our generation, which is to earn enough till we die. They're not bothered about earning enough. They're willing to risk their careers. They're willing to risk on entrepreneurship. They're willing to risk on a lot of things to actually leave legacies behind. And such people will pursue knowledge, will pursue learning, will look at learning as lifelong and not look at learning as a job enablement requirement. Therefore, people like us would be partners in their progress to success. And their need for people like us would be very high. Somewhere,
Uh,
if I foresee the future in the long sense, a knowledge services company like ours could become a success coach to an individual. It's possible.
okay.
It's very
Can I
interesting.
add the third category to that?
Yeah.
Those who look at all these things as a route to escape. That's a significant bucket.
Yeah.
So, how will you cater to them?
Well, I don't have a ready mix answer yet, but I guess we would have to cater to these different people in different forms. I honestly don't have a off the cuff, answer to provide for it. Uh, but we would be providing for a lot of these people who look at the future from their own prisms. And today, everyone's view of the future is from their prism. It's not the world view of the future. That's the change.
Right. See, in our earlier conversation, we talked about the worldview and reality, right? But there is most often most people forget the expert view because the very definition of expertise has to be thin, very narrow, right? But somehow it is taken as a in a very broad way expert view, whereas it is a very so given that, and also particularly when we talk about a lot of this uh, aspects which touch humans, right? In like education, if you look at it, though education is one vertical, but the aspects of impact, it's very wide, right? It touches upon physically, mentally, psychologically, and technologically, emotionally. So, so when you look at how do you employ these expert opinions or expert perspectives when you deal with this horizontal aspects, and how do you mix this vertical thing into it? I mean, I'm really curious about that.
So even as we speak, I think maybe the future has arrived in that sense. What my generation called as expert opinion, today's generation looks at it as informed perspectives. They don't see it as expert opinion. They look at you and they say, okay, he's got an informed perspective. He's well read. He's got a viewpoint which is his. So they take the multiple viewpoints, but they take their decisions. I think one generation ago, the expert had a very large say in decision making. Today, our role is to provide that input and stay away from the decision making process. So I think that's the way the world is changing. People want to take their decisions. They're clear it's their risk, but they want to take the call. And they use people who are informed, etc. Maybe call them advisors, maybe call them coaches, maybe call them buddies. The nomenclatures may change, but they look for perspectives. They sometimes look at them as mirrors to see if it echoes and reflects what they are thinking. So we may be validators of their thought, but They're essentially looking at people who broadly would fall into thought leadership. That's going to be currency of the future. People who can provide thought leadership will be in great demand.
What, in your opinion, would be the challenges and limitations going forward in this kind of a future?
Increasingly, when you start looking at the way the world is going, you tend to look at it from a wide angle lens and think everything is exploding. But if you actually look at that wide angle lens, it's actually narrow casting for success. People are going sharper and sharper and deeper at what they do and want to be the world's best at what they do. Today, they do not want to settle for just being the best in a city or a country. Everyone's looking at the world as a marketplace. And when they do that, today it's not about being good at what you do, it's about excellence at what you do. So the benchmarks are becoming global, even if your operational scale is just local. Which puts a huge amount of premium, therefore, on you getting every aspect of what you do right. So the limitations of people would be in their zone of scope where they can actually provide you what we would still loosely use as the word expertise.
Well, in such a scenario where people look at these expertise, that is one side, right? If you for some time, if you just but if you look at how the business will evolve with transactions and also the kind of even maybe let me just get a better example. Maybe education, right? You look at education now. So as much as we would like to, you say it's going narrow, but if you look at it now in the engineering, if you talk about mechatronics, right? It's mechanics, mechanical engineering, electronics, and computer science. So if you look at it, more and more studies are where, in fact, computers is becoming pretty much a horizontal. It's like English, right? So it's becoming a very essential skill. But then everything else is becoming adding on to multiple things. It's becoming more collaborative. So somewhere, in some sense, if you look at it, it's becoming more generalist approach to a specialist function, but at the same time, it's a multi-speciality within a function. So it's no longer as narrow, right? Even it's far more collaborative.
No, I actually think the contrary. I think because we are moving deeper and deeper, we are finding these synergies and collaborations, which help you to narrow cast further. Why are you saying mechatronics? Because you're not mechanical, you're not electronics, which is generic, you're mechatronics, which is below that. You're going deeper. So I don't think the synergy makes it wider. The synergy actually makes it narrower. It gives you a more focused scope within that to say, this is the area that I'm looking at. So the way the world is moving forward, and I have an interesting analogy for this, is the future is moving towards a clear shift between a generation where, if you take the analogy of food, food meant restaurant, and restaurant meant experience, and you went there and you had the experience of a restaurant. Today, the world has moved from restaurant to recipe. It doesn't matter whether you have a restaurant or not, as long as you've got the right recipe in your area of focus, you're going to sell. And the key to sell your recipe is reputation. So if you've got your reputation and recipe mixed right, you are in a world which is a no restaurant world. Classic examples are Apple and Uber. Apple does not have its own factories to make its phone. Uber owns no cars. They are the largest in their businesses. Why? Because they've got the recipe right and the reputation right. So as you keep narrow casting, you will find a space where you understand what your line of expertise is, and the rest of it you will just put together. Apple assembles its phones, like we curate our questions. So I think that's the way the world is moving. But clearly, there's a no establishment world. It's what you're going to bring together and provide. So that gives you cutting edge scale. Just look at it. I mean, Airbnb owns no hotels. They're the world's largest, in the rental business. So that's disruption.
So that's also separating the ownership from value creation, right? You don't have to be owning it to create or derive value.
Yeah.
So you need to be able to contribute to a significant bit, but without even having to own it.
Yeah. And as you go deeper and deeper, I was reading in one of my alumni networks, there's this young kids from Harvard who have created a phenomenal business model in the US where they've provided buddies for senior citizens to just have conversations.
Oh, yes, I came across that.
Yeah, that's it. Someone can turn around and ask, why do you need a Harvard degree to do that? But that's the deep insight that they found, that the sheer need of a senior citizen is to have meaningful conversations with people. And it turned out to be a phenomenal business model. That is going deep.
Well, that kind of conversation has been there, but only thing is that in our society, the resistance is very different. It's not really the need, but the resistance is very imaginary.
No,
what
but then
what
the
will the world
question to
think about
ask,
my son if I go to an old age home where I'll get to interact more freely with people of my age group?
yeah. So what starts as a symptom in the US could become a huge market in India or China. So you got to learn. It's like this. When the tsunami hits the shore, the water level rises much before. So are you going to find what technology hits you when it hits the shore, or are you going to be able to read it when the water level increases? That's futurescaping.
Well, one of these Scandinavian countries came up with a model of rewarding the students with credits if they spend time with elders, because they are a low populated country and there are a lot of seniors living alone. So they have attached it to their credits if they can spend time with. So they can either take it to their credits for the academy, or they can even cash it because they actually can buy things. So I think these kind of things will anyway come about because there are more elderly. In fact, I was talking about it in one other conversation like this, that we actually forget in India we have 16 to 17% of the population above 65, which is far bigger than most European countries put together. So that many gray senior citizens.
Yeah.
Right. So, and we still, the government only talks about the young India, which is good. But
yeah, we're also looking at that community only from one. So you can look at it from one lens, saying how do you provide them with care. The flip side of it, when we were working with Thomas Cook, we found something extraordinary which they had figured working with a consulting firm, is they actually found that people above 60 and below 75 are actually a huge potential travel crowd which was untapped. They have the money, they still have the health to travel, the willingness to travel, and they're not bound by any occupational time frames.
Not data on Indians, right?
Sorry?
It's not the Indian data, right? I mean, it must be the global. Indian data?
Indian data. And they started something called silver tours. Thomas Cook has a category called silver tours in India. Silver comes from the silver lining of the hair. And you don't qualify for it yet, but the silver qualifies. Not the biology disagrees with the silver line, but they actually started looking at Um, Probably certain destinations which are like religious, certain destinations which are fun, certain destinations which are just, spend time because they have the money. They have the money. They are actually rich at 60. They've retired. In fact, they found 60 to 65, 68 is even more attractive to sell tourist packages because they never had the time and now they've got the health and people are healthier today. So at
Right.
60, it's
Well,
amazing.
there was a very interesting content. I think it was a film, Hindi film, on one of these OTTs. I just don't remember where the protagonist is an elderly citizen who's retired, so the family expect him to be around to take care of their child. See, which is the case in India, right? That's why I was asking if it is Indian data. And incidentally, he ends up uh, going out on a vacation triggered by some. It's a interesting content. You should watch it. I'll try to recall and share it. But
No, no,
essentially what it is that the whole movie tries to say that, listen, he's elderly but he has a life of his own.
correct.
so
And
so
their interactions are with a generation which is below us. For example, about 6 months ago, I was walking past my dad at home and I suddenly saw him watching Crown on Netflix. And I looked and said, You follow Crown? He said, Yeah, I'm in the fourth season. I was like, Oh, I've got to catch up with dad. And I said, Who got you into it? And my daughter had got him into it. So he relates to that moment of history and time frame. So he thoroughly enjoyed Crown and he's 89. But would Netflix have ever thought 90 is a TG for them? They would not have. So this is where the deeper and deeper you go in the future, you're going to find markets. So you
right.
will find meaningful niche markets everywhere. Some will be large, some will be small, some will be unit customers at very high premium prices. You'll find these. That's the way I see the
So
future.
see, I know you do work with startups and startup ecosystems. In fact, one of our accelerators also you came in as a mentor. So now, if you have to advise these founders about the kind of future we're getting into, I mean, one obvious advice is I urge people, if you have not looked at the previous conversation or podcast, please do look at it. That's about money, right? I mean, build it, focus on creating value intrinsically. But other than that, from the future aspect perspective, what would you advise?
Be ready to fail. If you fear failure, you're not going to grow. You've got to be willing to fail. Don't prepare to fail, but be ready to fail. Let the fear of failure not stop you from the spirit of adventure. It's very, very important for today's youngsters to be willing to fail because they're going into places, it's like Star Trek. You're going where no man has gone before. So when you're going to do that, you're bound to fail on a few occasions. So be it. Take it in your stride. I think most of our youngsters look at that. The other advice I would give them is don't think short term. I honestly sometimes resist myself from advising youngsters who are looking at startups, etc., because they advocate a lot of things and talk a lot of things, but their goal is for the next funding. You're not going to go too far if you do not have a long term view on how you're going to help someone solve their problem or help them improve their lives. If you're not in either of the quadrant, you're not going to be large. You will be a small player, you'll play, maybe make a few millions, billions, whatever it is. That's about it. But you're not going to be remembered after you're gone.
Well,
So,
you
thanks. That's important for a startup guy.
you also do the startup crucible, right? You touch a whole lot of middle ages. If is that the audience among
Both,
the
yeah.
corporate?
We do one campus version and one corporate version.
So the corporate version, so typically the middle ages, right? Not
Yeah,
the young, fresh out of
largely,
colleges.
largely, yes.
So work is going to change, right? I mean, I for one even believe education is going to change so much from it's going to move away from certificates to skills.
Correct.
right? So, given that, how would you advise? Because this segment who are between 30 and 45 now, and if they're working for somebody, what's your advice for them? It's the wild west they're getting into.
No, I think, see, why do we have this problem? Why is this becoming a problem of saying, what do I do tomorrow? It's because the choices have just ballooned. Therefore, your problem of choice is making life more complex. If you contrast backwards to our life, when you passed out in the 90s, you had all of three choices, so life was not complicated. You know, in a sense,
Yeah.
lesser the choice, you had lesser problems. Today, ambition is also driven by the choices they have. No one wants to be less successful compared to the others. So I think what's important for youngsters to understand is to actually spend time on what is their actual area of calling. I always, when I am invited at B schools, etc., I always ask them this question. Let's assume I'm a company, day zero on your campus. I don't offer you any salary. What is the job you're willing to do?
Well, Giri, we are talking to this 30 to 45 years who possibly already have their, what do you call this, loans? EMIs, right?
Okay.
They have EMIs for their house or car or both.
Yeah.
So, so how would you, what would you advise
Oh,
such?
I address a lot of them when they actually call me for talks. You know, I am sometimes an external speaker at financial planning talks and so on. My talk on this is very pragmatic. I've always told couples, uh, take career breaks to pursue what you want to try in entrepreneurship alternatively. Uh, if you're a couple, then let's say I take the first 3 years off. I give my idea a shot while I'm ensuring the EMIs are going from a monthly income that comes to my wife. I then take a job. You take a break, give your idea a shot if both of you have an idea. If something clicks, both of you have something to build in the future. But if you're not going to invest those years giving your idea a chance, no one else is going to give it a chance. You got to give it a chance. And everyone today wants to ultimately do something on their own. That's one. Second, I think at a very fundamental level as a country, even with very educated people like MBAs, financial literacy needs to improve manifold in countries like ours. Our money does not make money for us. People just put the money in banks and keep it at 3%, 4%, 5%, whatever the percentage. I don't know what it is currently. But we're not financially prudent to actually invest. If you came out and with your first paycheck you started putting it into an SIP plan, what would your finance be when you were 30, 33, when you're 10 years into your work age? You've created crores for yourself. So we do not understand creation of wealth where you could actually become your own investor. We don't look at those things. And those are the areas we'd like to start looking at schools. That was my advocacy for the Karnataka government, and they took that seriously. Karnataka government is going to be among the first which is going to implement financial literacy in schools at scale, large scale. They're going to introduce entrepreneurship at scale. So, in fact, Karnataka has had a regime change, and the current regime looked at those and immediately called and said, we'd like you to come back and work with us. So I think it's nice. It's nice when people look at it from that perspective and say, hey, these are the things that we need to do.
Wonderful. See, you've also worked with this bureaucrat. You had a lot of good things to say, but now with this future ahead, what would your advice be to them?
See, I think when it comes to nation building, the ecosystem propels a nation. Sometimes governments resist that propellants. If the IT industry had waited for regulations to fall in place in this country, India may not have been a world force in IT.
See, regulation always follows business. So that's a given.
Correct. So the only way in which you can do that is enable more people with greater aspirations. That has to start in schools and colleges. It's very, very important we do that. And therefore, that shift from certification to skill, from skill to entrepreneur, is a very important progression mapping, which needs to start young. We will never, as a nation, find enough companies to employ our population. It will not work. You got to create more companies. Only as enterprises grow will we solve problems of a billion population country. You cannot solve it with Tata, Birla, Modi, Mahindra. You can't. You just can't. I mean, and they're still India's largest employers.
So, who do you think, as people, who do you think doing things that are going to have significant impact, positive impact in the future? Who do you think are doing things today?
Yeah, that's where I think it's coming down to individuals today.
So, any individuals that you can think of, you want to say that, okay, these people are doing something which is going to.
If I have to collectively put them into a bracket, I think the startup ecosystem of India has been a revelation for this country. They've done phenomenal. Look at the amount of people who got, whether it's Nika, whether it is Flipkart, whether it is Redbus, whatever have been the great ideas that have propelled India. More recently, the Zerodhas and Glow, or whatever the financial side of startups have been. Phenomenal disruptions have happened from these people. What have they shown? They've shown an enterprising attitude, they've shown courage, they've shown conviction, and they've shown the tenacity to take it on. You just need to replicate it. See, people also get into this wrong notion that you need to find a great idea. It's not. You can replicate a great idea which has worked well in another country in your country. Because you're fortunately a country which does not, you're not the forerunner in the ideation space. So there are other countries which have done things which you can actually replicate here. It's not difficult at all, and you've got a larger market here. So people just need to be willing to be enterprising. We need to go out of that mindset of a security of a salary check on the first of the month. And then I think, there will be a systemic change, which I think is actually happening. It's the parental generation which is preventing it. The children in schools that we have conversations with want to be entrepreneurs, want to do something different, want to have startup. It's their parents who are telling them, no, finish your engineering and get a 9-to-5 job. So we've got a paradox that's happening, but that'll explode.
So perhaps we need one Peter Thiel in India who will pay you if you quit your college and come and do your own thing. Yeah. But which individual, or do you think you want to take any names or call out some people who are doing things which are going to change the way the future will be?
I don't see how much influence in terms of years or span can an individual have. It's got to be far more than that for global impact or national impact to have. It cannot be individual triggered, even at the level of...
in our first part of the conversation, I asked you to talk about people who have influenced you, and you mentioned two names, where you said that they were not inspiring or motivating, but they help you change your perspective, which is what you think or regard is far more superior.
Yep.
So from that respect, do you see today, I mean, obviously both those names you took are no longer alive, but do you think you can identify some people you may have heard, read about, or even known personally, but they are doing things which could perhaps change perspective of people in the way they think or do things?
So if you look at it at a global scale, those are the kind of metrics that people like Elon Musk tick. These are the kind of people who tick those. You tend to find some of those surfacing in country like ours. Sometimes you found probably Jack Ma surfacing from China, who came across like someone who would create, change at scale and change things like that. I would actually be uncomfortable if such kind of changes revolve around individuals from a business perspective. because then economy gets controlled by individuals. The kind of people who I spoke of as change agents were more thought leadership changes. They influenced perspectives. They didn't influence economic output.
Correct. So
So,
that kind, do you think are there? I mean,
well,
you've come across any?
today it's also a dangerous path to work on, because unfortunately somewhere down the line these people become godmen, and it creates a different category of a problem. I just hope some of them end up
It's
becoming.
safer to talk about the dead.
Sorry.
It's safer to talk about the dead because they are not going to change it, erase it. That was
which
something they
is
did.
which is true, and for the kind of positions that I indulge myself in, uh, it is something that I feel is best interest of humanity, that these are not individual centric or individual dependent. Technically, if you look at it from that perspective and you put a model to that change, every Nobel laureate should be changing the world. But today, sometimes when you contrast history to the present, with all due respect, some Nobel laureates become like an award ceremony recipient. You celebrate their work and you acknowledge the past of their work, while technically a Nobel laureate should be someone who would bring about change, who would foster a new world. So, unfortunately, we're not able to see that. And like you said, things are going, more inward. So the impact of our change is more in our community, our society, our country. So we're not really seeing people shake up the whole world and so on and so forth. So I would be actually scared sometimes when, all power, whether to create or destroy, falls in the hands of a few individuals. Both extremes are wrong. And it does not help, a civilization of as many billion people that we are. I would like it to be systemic. I would like it to be individual across a spectrum. I think that's better, because it democratizes innovation. It democratizes distribution of wealth. It democratizes distribution of power. Otherwise, all of these can have adverse effects.
Predictions time. So, what's the first prediction you want to make?
Specific to education, I think people are going to study far more years than they ever did in the past. Education is not going to be something that you typically did in large volume and quantum till the age of about 25 or so. That's going to change. In the future, you're going to have people educating themselves in periodic successions. When I speak to youngsters, I always advocate to people who are in organizations. I tell them, if you've not done a post-graduation, save up money for a post-graduation in your 30s. In your 30s, save up money for an executive education in your 40s. In your 40s, save up money to become a board member in your 50s. Progressive education is going to be something that's going to be here to stay. That's not even a prediction for me, that's a belief. I go by that belief. Second, I think the geography in which you are rising from is going to become immaterial in the next 10 years or so. It's really not going to matter whether the idea came out from, Hosur, or whether it came from Texas, or whether it came from Beijing. Ideas will be received and incubated globally if they are worth their salt. So your place of origin is no longer going to be a great advantage to you. It has been through mankind, but that's going to change. Third, the restlessness of people to succeed and achieve in their life is going to increase, because increasingly people want to find meaning in their lives. And if they're going to have more time, they're going to ask more questions to themselves on what the hell am I doing with my life. It's going to all look nice for a year or two when you're not going out to work, when you're sitting at home, etc. But after that, you need purpose to wake up at 5:30 in the morning. And when that starts happening, there is a churn that would happen with the younger generation, which would be restless for achievement. So it can go both ways. You can then see probably in 20 years a hyper achieving world where everything that's happened gets disrupted, or you could have turmoil. I don't want to think that way. I'm a positive framework guy, but you could have a lot of turbulence in the world between, you have created it, I did not. So the haves and have nots could be, the turbulence frontiers of the future. So these are three large, wide predictions that I carry with me. A lot of these are based on the kind of reading that I do. I'm not giving my philosophical view of the future. From what I've read, from what I've gathered, this is the way I see the future.
Yeah, we are what we consume. So
Yeah. So I've got only one line which I keep describing today's world to youngsters. I think geography is history. It's a statement with a lot of deep understanding. Geography is history. No one's going to bother where they come from.
one last question, Giri. So, see, perhaps you are in your half life today, right? Around 50. So it's becoming, our age span is increasing. Even officially, lifespans are increasing. So, uh, the next half of your life, how do you see yourself living?
Well, I'd really like to be someone who can be of use to youngsters in terms of being able to mentor them. As it is, I find the time to do that. I also feel it's going to be an obligation of this generation to be the bridge for them. Unfortunately, when transition happens from a generation to the next, we don't really help them not do the same mistakes that we did. And I think, especially countries like ours, should not invest or waste time and money doing the same mistakes the previous generation did. If I can be a catalyst to prevent that, I'd love to play a role in that. Second, I would definitely love to play a role in areas and spaces where we bring the average aspiration of people versus what they end up achieving to a far more meaningful level than what we currently are doing in our country or even across the world. So I think a lot of work and focus needs to happen in rural spaces. I would like to focus that still in the genre of education and see if more and more rural children can have greater aspirations through education. I think we will have a better world in the future. So those are two spaces I would definitely like to dedicate a lot of my future time.
Well, thank you, and wish you all the very best. And thank you so much for making time to be here and share uh, your thoughts. And well, one side it's very diverse, but at the same time, it's been very focused as well. And thank you so much for the kind of clarity you have with what you're doing and what you want to do, which is fantastic.
On the contrary, the line in your program screen has actually bothered me, and I think it's going to be bothering me for a while, because I've been thinking, am I ready for the ride? And I don't seem to have the answer for it. Much as
No.
the comfort, clarity, that sounds comforting, but that is a powerful line. It's a very, very deep introspection line. I don't know if I'm ready for the ride. I think we are. I don't know if I am for sure.
Oh, well, I'm sure most of us are in that place, and the whole idea is to be ready as you run. You can't be ready and then start running.
No, I've got a view which I tell youngsters. If you've got clarity on the future and the future unfolds the way it does, then you're sure to reach success. If not, the path to success is going to be more adventurous. So that's
Either
what.
ways, you're going to enjoy
Either
it.
ways, you got to run on that path. So it's like two roads diverged in the woods. So you got to take it in that spirit. But this is fabulous. I think I must appreciate you for creating something like this, because I think no one spends time really to bring out perspectives of people about the future, because sharing those perspectives can really open up so many lives. So I'd love to catch up with the people you interviewed and catch up on those interviews. I will surely allocate time for that and look forward to some conversations with you on the tokens.
Positively. And thank you so much. And to all the listeners and audience, all the links of social handles and the business links of Giri are shared below. Please feel free to reach, follow them, and very exciting things they're going to be doing. And for your businesses, reach out, and also that shout out that was given to the entrepreneurs, do reach out to him as well, and also the investors, because this is for those who are looking at long term. So Giri is a my Hindi accent is going to be bad, but lambe risk good.
I am. I mean, we are actually. Uh, I'm also fortunate, to have a board that allows that. Sometimes it becomes very difficult for entrepreneurs if your board is very extensively revenue focused. Uh, I think we're blessed as a company that they look at the impact that we create. They look at what we do, which is sometimes not necessarily measurable on a balance sheet.
I'm just so curious. This is the third time you mentioned, the fourth time you mentioned board. Uh, uh, would have been very appropriate to have this conversation in our previous podcast, but what kind of people comprise your board?
Oh, very different people. I don't want to necessarily name people, but we do have people who headed uh, the CBSE board in India in the past. Uh, One of them is the former academic director. So there was a time when 13,000 principals reported to him. So we've got a professor who's among the world's top 25 in innovation. I have a couple of my professors from Harvard who advise me. So we've got a lot of people who I see as thinkers. We have a lady who's built institutions as a school principal, who gives us perspective in terms of what to do in the school space. So she's a huge asset for us. So we do have varying people. We also have people who come from industry sometimes and give us a perspective into that side of it. Some very tall leaders who found the time to advise people like us. I think we really owe it in great measure to them. So I'm happy. Those are areas where we are well entrenched.
Well, I think that's fantastic because most often we find people who are looking for echo chambers in the board, right? So it's so good. Uh, I was not sure whether it's okay to ask, but I thought it is good that you shared this because I think it's so important to bring people. And one of the one more additional reason why I started this is that I thought this is the best way to surround myself with great ideas and great thinkers. So, which I'm able to do it at least I manage to do one conversation every week, 1 to 2 conversations. So I'm surrounded with, uh, if
Oh,
not physically, but through
no,
conversation.
I'd like to listen to those and learn, because each one would have their own journey and a perspective. So everyone has our own journeys. So would love to, but truly delighted to have been part of the series. Really
Thank
appreciate
you.
you thinking of me to be worthy to be here.
Well, I'm sure the audience and listeners uh, see it otherwise. And thank you so much. And once again, till we come back with some more great conversations, listen to those which we have missed. And till then, enjoy the ride. Giri, once again, thank you so much.
Thanks a lot. Goodbye.